Welcome back to the Donkey Vote Political Podcast for another interview. Today we have the honor of interviewing the member for Leichhardt in North Queensland, Warren Entsch. Warren, thank you for joining us today.
I'm going to correct you to start with. You're not in North Queensland. You're in far North Queensland.
Far North Queensland, yes.
Far North Queensland. Anything south of around about England, we call that Mexico. We're very parochial. So we're in far North Queensland. So, and I'm here, of course, in Cairns, and an area that I represent from Cairns that goes right up to the mainland of Papua New Guinea, an area of some 151,000 square kilometres, takes in places like Cairns and Port Douglas, Cooktown, takes all of Cape York and all of the Torres Strait. And when I'm up in my outer islands, like on Saibai Island or Boigu, I can actually see the villages on mainland Papua New Guinea. We are 4 kilometres from the mainland of Papua New Guinea, so close, in fact, that in the wet season, you see the deer and the pigs swimming across from mainland Papua New Guinea onto Saibai and Boigu. The islanders have a feast of venison, pork, and they stay on those islands until the surface water dries up, and then they swim back to mainland Papua New Guinea. That's how close you are. People don't realise just how close it is.
Yeah. I don't think many people realize that at all, that, Australia in general is like so close to Papua New Guinea. It's only like a couple kilometers away.
4
Um,
kilometres.
4 kilometers, yeah. So, before we get started with the interview, Warren, are you able to give us a little brief explanation of yourself, just for the audience out there who may not know entirely who you are?
Okay, well, I guess I'll go through what I was explaining to you earlier on. I left school when I was 14, year 10. I followed my father into work, into his job in the local railway as a lad porter, basically a toilet cleaner. And then from there, I got a job with the local bank. I was actually working in the bank in 1966, January 1966. That's when we went to decimal currency, from pound sterling. It was a very interesting experience at the time. Then I went into the state government insurance as a junior there for a few years until I actually got called up for national service in 1969, but I'd already applied for and was accepted into the Air Force. So I did 9 years in the Air Force as an aircraft engines fitter, spending most of my time in the north, in the Maritime Squadron in Townsville, 10 Squadron, and then later on transferring across to Rotary Wing and Caribous and Iroquois helicopters till I got out in 1978, I think. So that was my Air Force career. I then went bull catching, so I'd do something a little bit different up in the lower Gulf, and did very, very well out of it. It was a different sort of bull catching to what you see today with the mechanical arms. We would step off motorcycle or trail bikes or vehicles and just grab the bull by the tail and lean back and see whether he was right. Yeah, see whether he was right or left-handed. And whichever way he turned, we went in the opposite direction. And because they're very top-heavy and they'd fall over. And then you used to wear what we call bull straps, like just a big strap around your waist, and you just pull one off and wrap it around his legs and tie him up. So, and of course, it is a little dangerous. And eventually one decided it. He caught me and put me out of commission. I decided then I needed another occupation, mainly because once you have that experience, you can't be confident. You can't afford to hesitate for a second, because that could be between life and death. And I wasn't confident that I was going to not hesitate. So when I recovered, I got a job, local bird park in Cairns, looking after birds. I have a good knowledge of it. I've been a passion of mine all my life, becoming the bird keeper. And during that time, I was asked by the owner. He said to me, I understand you were catching wild bulls for a living. I said, yes. He said, well, what do you know about crocodiles? And I said, well, I know they bite. That's all I knew about them. But anyway, he said, well, I'm wanting to open up a crocodile park next door. He said, will you go and catch me some crocodile? basically I went and spoke to somebody that knew how to catch one and set myself up, and we caught some crocodiles. And I ended up managing the crocodile park and doing all the displays there for the tourists, snakes and crocodiles. And I did that for some time until I got basically sick of living in the bush. And I said, I need a career change. And as it turned out, he also owned real estate offices in Cairns and put me into one of his local real estate agent offices. And I did exceptionally well. Eventually picking up a couple of business partners, one from Germany and one group from Japan. And we bought cattle stations in Cape York, and we bought a crocodile farm in the Northern Territory. And basically I was involved in those, quite large properties. And we had the largest commercial crocodile farm, Janamba, in Australia, and plus the cattle stations in Cape York. And that's where I was when I eventually got into politics. And the rest is history. I got elected in 1996, and here I am in 2003, and still in
2023.
Yeah, I did step down. I did step down for 3 years in 2007 because I had to fulfill a promise to my son, who was 2 when I got elected, and I always promised him that when he became a teenager, that was Dad's time, and whatever I was doing, I'd stop doing it so that he could come with me, because he was living with his mum, not with me. And so he never forgot that, and he reminded me as he turned 13, and so I felt I had no choice but to step down, and he came to live with me for those years. And when he went to university, he talked me into going back in 2010. You know, while from a career point of view, it's probably not the best decision I've made, but from a personal perspective, I'm so proud I've done it. He's 30 years old now, and he's the most amazing boy. And we got a level, there's a closeness there that would never ever have happened if I hadn't have fulfilled the promise that I had made to him as a child. So, yeah, no, I'm very proud of him, and I'm pleased that I've done it. And yeah, so I've been in and out and in and all of that at my own, on my own terms, which is generally unusual for politicians. Too many of them they either stay too long and get elected out, or they get defeated at an election. And the reality is the average political life is less than 6 years. So on 2 occasions, I've done quite well.
Yeah. And I think as well, the point you bring up there, especially when you stood down in 2007, sometimes, our personal lives are important more than our careers. As you've said, like, spending time with your son, it's probably more important than, being in Parliament all the time and not being able to see him as much as possible.
Well, it is. And I mean, at the end of the day, you've got your family for your whole life. You've got your career, you've got your politics or your career for as long as you're able to contribute. So I think you need to put it into that perspective as to what is the most important.
Yeah, exactly. We'll now get started with our questions. That was a very good introduction there, Warren, I have to admit. So yeah, our first question to you is, how was your schooling life? And do you have any memorable moments?
Well, I mean, most of mine was done in the local school up at Mareeba. For a short time, I was in Cloncurry for 1 year. But interestingly enough, I didn't wear a pair of shoes until I went to high school. So a little country,
just walking around barefoot,
and but it was a happy time. I mean, I'm still in contact with friends of mine that I went to school with. We still catch up from time to time. And, I mean, memorable moments in school, I mean, they're starting to fade a little bit now until I start to catch up with my school friends on our regular reunions. But, it was nothing out of the ordinary with it, other than the fact that, as I said, I never wore shoes until I hit high school. And I wasn't the exception. I was probably more the general. Most of the kids up there didn't. So I went right through public school, in the local state schools, and so as I say, I've still got friends from when I went into grade 1. that I'm still in contact with. So
Yeah. That's pretty crazy as well, because a lot of people I've talked to, especially like in their 20s and 30s, like they don't have much contact with a lot of their school friends. But Warren, you at your great age of 73 are still in contact with a lot of people
yeah,
from your primary and high school, which is really, really good, because I think it's important that, especially for me, Tobias, and George, to continue having contact with a lot of our friends. So into the future, because a lot of the time when you go to university, when you go start your career, you kind of distance yourself a little bit, and you go through your own pathways, and if you're not doing the same course, for example, or you're not having the same career, sometimes you lose that bond and connection you have with a lot of your high school friends. So I think that's really interesting that you're still in contact with a lot of your
yeah.
primary and high school
Last
friends.
last week, unfortunately, when I was in Canberra, they had their Christmas lunch in Mareeba, and unfortunately I missed it. But nevertheless, we still do it. And the reality is, when we sit down together as a group of 73-year-olds, let me tell you that we very quickly revert to memories of what we had when we were 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10-year-olds and young teenagers. The memories just flood back, and they're shared experiences. And so you're right. I think it's very, very important, where you can, maintain those connections, because they are connections for life. And you all go different ways. I
100%.
mean, it's fascinating to see
Yeah.
where all of those that started with me, those that we're going to conquer the world, and those of us that were sort of going to be fairly mediocre and do nothing. It's interesting where we find ourselves. Goodness me, 60 odd years later, 65 years later.
Yeah. It's so interesting where life takes us, when
Hmm.
yeah, like you never know where life
You
will take you.
never
Like
ever know. You never
I
know.
never I don't think you would have thought that you'd become a politician when you were a 14-year-old, wouldn't you have, Warren?
No, I had no concept of it whatsoever. None whatsoever.
It's crazy where life takes
Hmm.
you. All right, we'll move on now to our second question. Tobias.
Yes, Warren, you served in the Air Force before entering Parliament. Are you able to talk about your experience in the Air Force and whether you think young people should join our defense service?
But can I say, defence forces now are very different from the time when I served, from 1969 to 1978. Having said that, however, at the time I used to complain about it, but the level of camaraderie that you have, again, like from school period, those friends are with me today. And I had a nickname in the Air Force. They used to call me Fred, and I don't know where it come from, but it was Fred. And even today in my office, you get people who ring up my staff and they say, "Oh, can we talk to Fred?" Now, all my staff know that Fred is code for Warren, and that means it would have been somebody that served in the Air Force with me. Now, the time that I served in the Air Force, I have to say to you, I enjoyed immensely. Had an opportunity for my first overseas travel. But the friendship and the camaraderie and the work that we did was quite exceptional. And I probably would have stayed. I went up to Darwin the day after the cyclone as part of the recovery team up there and spent a year there. So when I came back, I had an opportunity to be able to, as part of the agreement for me spending all that time up there, I could have a choice of where I go as after Darwin. I went back to Townsville, but I spent a lot of time in maritime reconnaissance before the civilians, where we did a lot of work from Townsville all across the top end, across to Christmas and Cocos Island, looking for illegal boats, etc., in our territories. And I spent many years doing that. But then when they retired the Neptunes, which were the aircraft that I was working on, I had the choice. And I decided, rather than go to Adelaide, where the Maritime Squadron was also located, I chose to stay in Cairns, and I worked with the Caribous, the old ex-Vietnam Caribous, Caribous, and the Iroquois helicopters, and which I enjoyed immensely. And it was when the decision was made by the Defence Force to transfer the ownership of or transfer the rotary wing or the helicopters to the Army, I had to either get transferred into the Army or go to Adelaide. And at that point, I didn't believe that the Army should be flying helicopters. It was a job for the Air Force, and I didn't want to go to Adelaide. So at that time, I decided to take my discharge after 9 years. Now, in retrospectively, taught me a lot of things. It taught me how to do my own washing, make my own bed, and make sure I do it properly. Otherwise, it'd get trashed on me. A lot of basic things that are really good for life skills, and you don't really appreciate how good it is until you come back after many years and have a short experience back in the military. And my experience came probably about 10 years ago. In the part, we have a defence parliament program where we have the opportunity of getting embedded into military units, whether it be Air Force, Army, or Navy, and just to basically work with servicemen and with politicians, so you get a better understanding of the life and the needs of the various militaries. My first one was in. I went up to Darwin, and I went for a couple of weeks on the HMAS Townsville, which was a patrol boat that was operating out of Darwin. And I spent a couple of weeks on that vessel working with the sailors. And at that stage, we were focusing primarily on illegal fishing. And I embedded myself in. I did everything the sailors did in their training and etc. I slept in the forward decks there with the junior sailors. I slept in the senior sailors area as well. So I had a broad experience. And whenever they were doing boarding parties, I always went with them, and they did drills on fires, etc. In the engine rooms, I was involved in all of that. And it was an amazing experience. But interestingly enough, after a couple of weeks, we came back to Darwin, and I had to disembark. And I'll never forget it. I didn't want to leave the boat. Even though I was ex-Air Force, I didn't want to leave the boat. And I had this profound sense of sadness as I was leaving. And I reflected on it for a while, and I realised that what it was it was the first time since I had left the Air Force in 1978 that I had this real sense of camaraderie and of mateship and, a closeness that you can only develop in the military. And I'd never, ever experienced it from when I left the Air Force in 1978 until I stepped onto that boat. And so I had this sense of sadness of something, but I just realised just how important and how significant an impact it had on me. And I actually wrote a piece on it about exactly that as an opinion piece that was published. And I was very, very proud that I did that. I did, subsequent to other trips, I went into the Middle East for a couple of weeks and during the last conflict. And again, the same sort of experience and the same sort of emotions. But I did realise at that stage when they tried to feed me into I did great. I was on a refueling aircraft and watching these fighter pilots coming in, taking off from the airstrip where we were based, and they would have to refuel 4 or 5 times in the air to be able to get home. Just stop and imagine that, the complexity of, they had nowhere near enough fuel ever to get home. They had to refuel in the air 4 or 5 times, and you'd be sitting there watching them, and they were so close. They give you a wave as they suck in their fuel and they took off again. Just hard to imagine that happening. But and that's we were flying in through over Kuwait and through Iraq and places like that. But the one thing I did realise there, which was quite amazing, was that I now know why they don't put middle-aged, overweight men try to feed them into the driver's seat of an armoured vehicle. You just don't, particularly all the kit on, you just don't quite fit. But again, an amazing experience, and I take my hat off to all those young people that go into the Defence Force, and the things that they do is it's quite extraordinary, and should never ever be forgotten. And I would encourage anybody. What a great way to really get some experiences by spending a time in the military. The discipline, the camaraderie, and everything else. The sense of service is something that lives with you forever, and there is nothing that you can do after working, spending time in the Defence Force that those experiences don't apply. And I can tell you, almost every day, there's something I draw from my service experience that I can do in my work as a member of Parliament.
Yeah, that's a brilliant answer there. I think for a lot of young people, especially nowadays, like they don't, I guess, see the entire point of serving in the military and serving in our defense forces. I think a lot of defense forces I've heard are really struggling to get a lot of young people into the army and into the air force and the navy, especially. So I think your story there, Warren, is really, really good for a lot of the young people around, showing that the mateship and the camaraderie that you can develop in the army, or in any defense force, battalion or anything, is is lasting for life. And the friends that you make there and the sort of skills that you learn are skills that you can't really learn in any other industry.
Can I say just one other point on that? To this day, I from infrequently run into people that I served with back in the 1969 to 1978. I may not have seen them for 30 or 40 years, but when I walk and see them, within a heartbeat, it's like we'd never ever had any time apart, with the shared experience, and you just immediately get into this. Immediately there, that friendship, and it's there for life. It's shared experiences, and like no other. You can go into business, you can do all sorts of other things. You don't have that, when you walk away and 10 years later you're struggling to remember their name or who they were. But as a person that you've served with, it's indelible. It's there forever. And the moment you catch up with them, irrespective of the time since you last saw them, it's almost like it's just immediately pick up and continue.
Yeah, it's like, I guess it's kind of like you never really left the army. Like you were just talking to them yesterday when you were
That's
serving.
right.
So the
Exactly.
memories just never disappear.
Never, ever disappear. The only thing is that they look a little bit different. It's hard to imagine that they're actually
A little
getting
bit more
older.
wrinkles.
A lot more wrinkles.
Yeah.
Okay.
Brilliant story there, Rowan. We'll now get on to our third question. George.
Yep. So, in addition to working in the Air Force for 9 years, you also had many other lines of work, including a railway porter, insurance clerk, real estate salesman, fitter, and builder with a mining company, grazier, and a crocodile farmer. Do you have any memorable moments working in these industries?
Where do you start? Every single one, right from the day I turned up as a 14-year-old to report at the railway platform to the station master, who frightened the living hell out of me. He never spoke, but I'd have to be there. He'd be watching his clock. I'd have to be there at 7 o'clock. And at 7 o'clock, he would, I'd walk with him. I'd have a bucket and a mop and follow him around to the back of the station, because he was the keeper of the keys. He had the keys to open up this 44-gallon drum, or 200-litre drum of a substance called phenol, which was quite a strong smell that they used it for cleaning in those days. He would unlock it, he would squirt it twice, and then lock it up and walk away. I'd then have to mix it up and go in and clean the mess in the toilets, because I had to have them ready and sparkling for when the local rail motor come from Cairns to Mareeba at 8 o'clock, when they all got off and went into Mrs. Deacon's tea house. So I remember it quite vividly and intimidated. When I went into the bank, I was 15. And this was, as I said, a decimal currency changeover. And the teller there was he was the one that everybody looked up to. And I used to have to travel with him. He had a hot Holden ute. And I used to travel with him as an offsider when he went around to all the little branches around the place, picking up the pounds, the sterling money. And I'd be his escort, 15. And we'd bring them back to the central bank in Mariba. And I had this hand machine that you used to pull it down, and it had perforation. And you'd put all these notes in it, and you'd pull it down, and they'd perforate the notes, and that basically stopped them from being legal tender. There was numbers and that on these things, and it was all done by hand. And then they were all counted and packed up. And once we got a box full, we'd come down to Cairns, and they'd be exchanged for decimal currency. And it was quite an amazing experience, because there was Bob and his hot ute, and me as a 15-year-old as the protector. And we had this very big handgun that used to sit on the seat between us, but it didn't work. You couldn't fire it. And that was the security. It was quite amazing. And I mean, if you could imagine that scenario today, it's just impossible. But that's the way it was. And it was a very interesting time, because you used to cop a lot of abuse in the bank, because people would come in arguing that the government was robbing them, because for every sixpence that they gave the bank, we gave them back 5 cents. For every shilling, or 12 pence they gave us, we gave them back 10 cents. And so they reckoned we were robbing them of a couple of pence every time. And it was interesting. Some of them become very, very aggressive and quite abusive and refusing to hand their money over. But an interesting experience, nevertheless. Insurance, I had similar experiences there. I mean, I have to say to you, when you go through all of these things, there's so many experiences. It's hard to be able, you run out of time. But every single everything element that I had, there were experiences that were part of the job right through, as I've shared with the experiences in the Air Force. Fitter welder, I left and did that at Queensland Nickel for a little while. Took over actually as a union delegate there for a short time, give me a bit more experience. Not bad for a Liberal to be a union delegate at a site delegate there for the Metalworkers Union. And of course, as a grazier, we developed properties, and most amazing experience, very, very large, thousands of square kilometres, tens of thousands of head of cattle, and, building hundreds on Olive Isle. I think we put about 600 kilometres of fences. You could drive around Olive Isle for 2 days around it and still not leave the property. And, I think we put in 52 dams, a couple of sub-artesian flowing bores, about 5 houses. I mean, a lot of stuff in there. And it was an amazing time, and really enjoyed it. Crocodile farming, again, lots of experiences, and going out collecting eggs, and you would have seen the Matt Wright crocodile experiences and on TV, whatever. We used to go out of helicopters and
Crocodile Dundee, that sort of thing.
That sort of stuff. Steve Irwin worked for me for a little while when he left school. I knew his dad very well. I still know his dad.
Wow.
I have very good friends. And so, and Steve and I were quite close. And so there's lots and lots of moments there that I think about. And I mean, all of those have helped me develop the person that I am today. And I have no regrets on that, It actually gives me a much broader scope. When people come to see me, there's not too much that they can tell me about that I haven't actually had some level of experience with, and that makes a difference.
Yeah, exactly. I think the experiences that you just talked about there, like, not many people in their whole lifetimes could have that many, works in life and that many jobs. And it's a pleasure that you are serving in Parliament, that you're able to share these sort of experiences with the public. And, it does show that, like, you don't have to, as we said before the interview, you don't have to come from a, legal background. You don't have to come from a business background to be in Parliament. You can be a crocodile farmer. You can be you can work on the railways cleaning toilets.
Can I say to you, in my maiden speech, I actually made reference to that. And, and I said, what other country in the world can you start as a 14-year-old with no tertiary education whatsoever, and working as a toilet cleaner as a 14-year-old, and suddenly find yourself in the Parliament of Australia as an elected member, and now one of the longest serving and most senior in the Parliament? There's not another country that can occur, and this is where we need to have a great deal of pride, with all the faults and all the criticism that we see around Australia. Let me tell you that there is no, and with all its faults, there's no greater democracy than what we have in this country. Our governments change not with a gun, but with the power of a vote. And there's a nice, orderly transition. A few weeks ago, I went to Angola in West Africa.
All right, Bob, you ready?
Yep.
How was that? Better than a roller coaster.
So exciting.
It's unreal, eh?
So thrilling.
Rolling now. Nice.
It's not gonna happen. It's not gonna happen.
After a little short break, let's just call it a little ad break. We're back now with Warren. And yeah, just from where you were talking a bit about Angola before, if you would like to continue.
Yeah, just saying that one of the first things I noticed when I drove through Luanda, which is the capital, was the number of people on the streets with missing limbs. And I then realised that Angola still is the most landmined country in the world. It's not much bigger than the Northern Territory. It's got about 16 provinces. It's got 16 provinces of states. It is one of the 5 most wealthy countries in Africa because of its oil and its minerals. Very, very wealthy. But the majority of the population live in absolute poverty. And so they're living on the streets without limbs. There is no social welfare, anything like that. So, they've got to survive the best they can. And it's very, very sad. And you realise just how wonderful we have it here. With all our criticisms, there's just nothing better with our health system, with our welfare system, and all the other things that we provide here. I mean, can you imagine all these people without limbs, how they would benefit from our NDIS, for example? And sometimes it gets very depressing to see just how harsh it is, and overwhelmingly live under bits of corrugated iron and bits of canvas. There's no running water. There's no toilet facilities. There's no power, and they just survive on what they can get from day to day. So we should be very thankful for where we are here in Australia, because we do have, right across the spectrum, for all their faults, it's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, 100%. I think, some people don't realize how lucky we are to live in Australia. So I think we should cherish every opportunity we have to be here. So yeah, we'll move on now.
And remind other people, whether it be health education, infrastructure, social welfare, NDI, all of these things, they're not available in many other countries.
Yeah, like not many other countries have a welfare system, free healthcare like we do. So we really do have to cherish all of it. And even though our country does have a lot of issues, especially with housing, especially with a lot of climate change, that sort of thing, we still have to cherish every moment we have in Australia.
Yep, absolutely. Next
so we'll move on to the next question, because I do realize we're running out of time. So In your 27 years in Parliament, what would you say is the most important slash favorite legislation that you have passed, that you've helped get passed?
Well, I don't know whether you could say it's favourite or important, but there's a number of things that I've been involved in over the years. Probably the first big one that I got involved in was getting a very significant increase. I think it was $1.5 billion increase federally for mental health. And I played a very significant role in pushing that. But that was only a funding arrangement rather than legislation. I was very, very much involved in in fact, have drafted legislation to remove the legal and financial discrimination from the same-sex or gay people. That legislation went through uncontested in 2007, and that was primarily due to that was looking at financial and legal discrimination, which to me it just wasn't fair, and we were successful in getting that through. And in 2010, I established a parliamentary friendship group for the LGBTI community and continued my campaign. And in 2017, December 2017, I was successful in introducing legislation that saw Australia recognise same-sex marriage equality. And I'm known now as the father of gay marriage. That's the biggest social change in this country in 50 years. The last change of that significance was in 1967 when Aboriginal people were given the right to vote. So it's very significant. And I'm very, very proud of it. And as I keep reminding people that in this country, we do not have gay marriage. It doesn't exist. We only have marriage. We don't discriminate.
And I think those legislations that we just said, they're hugely important. Before 27, if you want to go, go for it, Warren.
I also was very heavily involved in introducing the legislation for medical cannabis.
Yeah.
So
I think,
but understand. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I think as well, especially with medical cannabis, as you said, like 20, 30 years back, I don't think a lot of, even with, gay marriage and that sort of thing, a lot of people never thought those bills would be passed. But I guess with your help, Warren, those legislations became reality.
Well, I just continued on. I think I realised well into my advocacy the greatest strength that I had, because when I first started, nobody wanted a bar of, but I looked at it and just thought it wasn't fair. But I realised but during the whole campaign, whenever I was asked by any of the journalists or anybody, and even to this day, I refused to confirm my sexuality because they, are you gay? And I just refused. I said, really, it's irrelevant. I'm happy for you to identify me any way you like. Just don't be offensive. And I said, because my advocacy's got nothing to do with my sexuality. But I was outed by a national journalist, I think back in 2006, when he wrote a full-page story on me and my advocacy. MP says why he supports the gays, but he didn't interview me. But he started his article by describing me as a fiercely heterosexual, far north Queensland, crocodile farming, wild bull catching liberal. Tick, 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 in relation to rednecks. And I support the gay community. I was furious at the time. This was when I read the article. It was in a Sunday paper. I was going to give him a serve on Monday. But I was very surprised when I opened up my emails. There was literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of emails that were coming through supporting me. But they weren't from the gay community. They were from family members and friends of people that were gay, and they were saying if a fiercely heterosexual farmer of Queensland, crocodile farming, wild bull catching liberal can stand up for my gay family member or friend, we want to come out too. And suddenly I realised that my strength in that advocacy was I was actually the first person that actually advocated for the gay community that wasn't identified as openly gay. And So I brought a much broader cohort of people along with me, not the gay actors, but families and friends, and said, well, we want to be out there. We want to come out and support it too. And that's how I started to turn the tides. And great deal of pride when I was able to introduce that legislation into the Parliament and see that vote in December 2017. And it has made a difference to a lot of people's lives because they feel that they're accepted on who they are. And to me, really, it doesn't matter what your sexuality is. I mean, as long as you're a decent person and you do the right thing, I don't give a bugger what your bloody sexuality is. You know, it should have nothing to do with it. And so it's worked. So that's been to me, it's one of my big successes. I'm an unlikely champion for it, but nevertheless. And I established a parliamentary friendship group for the LGBTI community in 2010. It was the first and only parliamentary friendship group of that nature in the world. Still going. I'm still the chair. I'm still a co-chair. The only ongoing co-chair since I established it in 2010. And it's nice when I go out anywhere, when I get people that whether they're transgender or gay or whatever their gender may be, who feel comfortable to come up to me and embrace me and thank me for what I've been able to do, so they feel that they've been included as part of our community now. So that makes a difference, and there are very few politicians can say that they've actually made that sort of difference when they get into the Parliament.
Yeah. And I think as well, just to touch on your point previously about that media release that you had of you, that they made about you on, you know, the newspaper, Sunday newspaper in 2006. I think that is it's a pretty big assumption, but I think it's a pretty big thing in society, especially with stereotypes, just because, you know, you're from far north Queensland, crocodile hunter, they assume that, you know, you were
and I'm a liberal.
Just a redneck. And yeah, and you know, they were completely wrong, I guess.
Can
in
I
that
say
sense.
to you that it's always assumed it's always the left and the Labor Party and the left that make all these social changes, right? That's generally the assumption. You know, the Liberal Party is generally and the Conservatives are generally the Antichrist. However, it was the Liberal Party that got rid of that gave women the right to vote.
Yeah, it was
the Liberal Party.
Yeah, it was the Liberal Party as well that gave the Indigenous people the right to vote.
Yeah, but the Liberal Party got rid of the White Australia policy.
Yeah.
The Liberal Party were the ones that did the vote for Aboriginal people in 1967. And of course, I always remind them now it was the Liberal Party that actually gave the right for gay people to be able to marry. So when you stop and think about these very significant social changes, it is what the Liberal Party does. So it's wrong for one political party to claim some level of superiority over others. So I'm very, very proud of the fact that I am a Liberal, even though I can say some of my colleagues get a bit worried about me sometimes. I don't mind. It's all part of being different.
Exactly. I think, and the Liberal Party as well, it's as John Howard described it, it is a broad church, so it has so many different viewpoints. You know, you've got people from pretty liberal backgrounds, you've got people from pretty conservative backgrounds, but they come together and they you know, they work on legislation to. That's what I think that's what I think the Liberal Party has over the Labor Party, because Labor in general, a lot of them are from union-based backgrounds, but Liberals can represent the whole of Australia because, you know, they've got people from conservative backgrounds and liberal backgrounds.
Mind you, I mean, you still got the religious right and that in the Liberal Party too, which is probably as much a challenge as some of those from the left in the Labor Party. But your next two questions actually tie in very, very well together. So if you want to fire those off, you're welcome to.
Yeah, we'll get onto those questions now. So I think it is with you, George.
Yeah. Who do you say is a political role model or idol?
I have to say John Howard. I mean, I've never been, until I got elected, I was never much into politics. Interestingly enough, I was very much a swinging voter. I can remember I was wasn't happy with Gough Whitlam, but I was very, very disenchanted by Malcolm Fraser, and make no apologies the fact that I voted for Bob Hawke. but it was Paul Keating that really stirred me up and got me involved in politics. And that's when I decided that I might be able to make a difference, and decided to contest. But Howard, I mean, was just, to me, I mean, I served with Howard for the full term that he was in Prime Minister. I was a member of his executive for 8 years for that first term that I was there. So, and I had a very good, quite close and positive relationship with him. The other one that I really look up to, who actually came in with me in 1996, was Brendan Nelson. And I think Brendan was the best Prime Minister we never had, which was very unfortunate. He was undermined by Malcolm Turnbull, ruthlessly undermined by Malcolm Turnbull, and which to me was an absolute tragedy. And he's somebody that is a very dear friend and somebody that I've admired. And, you know, he's gone on and done some wonderful things. He was over in Brussels as the ambassador. He was in the War Memorial there for a long time. And he's now the CEO of Boeing. He's based in London. But again, somebody that we really should. I so regret that we didn't have an opportunity to have some time with him as the Prime Minister. He would have been a fabulous one.
Yeah, I think Brendan Nelson, he's a forgotten figure within the Liberal Party, I'd say, in a lot of circumstances. Like, people forget that he was opposition leader for about a year or so after John Howard. So, you know, people just automatically assume it was just Malcolm Turnbull after him, but Brendan Nelson was there. So,
well, it's interesting, and I've got a lovely photo in my office in Canberra. I was promoted to the executive in 1998. So I'd been here for 2 years. And then in 2001, I was offered another portfolio, a more senior one. And I declined it with John Howard. I said, no, I wanted to stay where I was, because Liberals have never held my seat before, and I was doing work that I was really enjoying. And I said, no, I don't want it. I said, but if you're interested in offering a job to somebody, I said, how about giving it to Brendan Nelson? And he was quite surprised that I would do that. And he actually said to me, you know, first time I've offered a promotion to somebody and they said, no, I don't want it, but give it to my mate. And on that basis, he did. He said, but I'm going to do that. And he offered job. And I think that was the parliamentary secretary for education, I think, from memory. But Brendan then, of course, went on to do fabulous things. And there's a great photo of me and with Brendan embracing me at the Governor-General's when he's being sworn in as a parliamentary secretary. I think it was in 2001, and knowing full well that he wasn't expecting to get offered a job because there was other competition there. But Howard, to his credit, gave it to him because I said, no, I don't want to give a job to me, mate. And I thought that was really nice.
yeah, you know, that's something we don't really see much in politics nowadays. You know,
No.
a lot of people just want to go up the political you know, ladder all the time. You know, they'll fight over parliamentary roles and ministerial positions. But I guess it's a good thing to see that, you know, sometimes if you don't want a role or you don't think you're ready for a role, you know, giving it to your best mate's always a good option.
Can I just say to you, and this is very important in politics, I was promoted and onto the executive within 2 years of being elected in 1998. I stepped down from the executive just before the 2007 election because I was retiring to spend time with my son. When I came back in 2010, at the insistence of my son, who was going to uni, who now has 3 degrees, so he's doing very well. I was immediately offered under Tony Abbott's leadership, the chief opposition whip's job, which I accepted and did that for 3 years. But after that, I refused, and I made it very, very clear that I did not want another promotion. I did not want to go back onto the executive. Because if I'd have gone on to the executive, it meant that I could not have followed my campaigns in relation to the same-sex marriage and other things that I was doing, because they weren't party policy. and as a member of the executive, you have to abide by party policy. And
Yeah.
so on several occasions, I said no to promotions and made it very clear I didn't want them, which put me in a position which is far more powerful, in my view, than somebody that is a senior minister, in so much as I could do what I believe is the right thing to do. And they can't, first of all, coerce me into changing my view because and offer me something because they know I refuse to accept it. And they can't threaten to punish me by taking something off me because I don't hold any position.
Anything.
Which, and this is the reason that attack, actually, because you ask a question, why did I go to the Liberal Party? The reason I went there was because with the Labor Party, all the caucus members are bound by party policy. With the Liberals, we have the right to express our own views, and we are not going to be threatened or be disendorsed for our views. We have the right to sort of to have, you know, to vote against it, to cross the floor, to have a different view without being punished. And so that's what attracted me in the first instance, because, you know, I agree with a lot of the, I agree absolutely with the Liberal philosophy, but there are most of the policies I can support. But if there's something that I don't, I like to be in a position where I can actually reserve my right and not be penalised for it. And so that's what happens when you're in a position like mine. So they can't take anything off me. They can't offer me any inducement. So they've got to negotiate with me. Otherwise, I will vote against it. And that's exactly what has happened. And I think a lot of the new ones that are coming into Parliament sort of have their eyes on the Prime Ministership or senior ministerial positions, but don't realise that in doing so, they would never have the opportunity to do what I did and create that big social change over 50 years in relation to marriage equality and the removal of legal and financial discrimination and other things that I've been involved in. So I take a great deal of pride in that, and I think it's a lesson there for people that are looking to become involved in politics. What do you want to achieve? Do you want to sort of build up something as their own personal career, or do you really want to make a difference?
Yeah.
Sometimes
I think,
you can't do both.
Sadly, you can't do both. And I think it's been shown a lot as well recently, especially with Bridget Archer, you know, crossing the floor on all of the bills. Julian Leeser resigning from shadow cabinet because he was supporting the voice to Parliament. So I think it is shown a lot in the Liberal Party that, you know, you can have a freedom of expression and show your own views on things without, you know, necessarily losing party membership or losing pre-selection. You know, it's a party that allows you all to express your views, even if you don't agree with the leadership.
And the fact, you know, with Bridget and with Julian and others, doesn't mean to say that the party's in total disarray. It's just, it means that we're functioning as we should. And people have that right to have their own opinions here and not be locked in. And I mean, I know there were a lot of Labor members that were very much conflicted by the gay marriage debate, but they had no choice. They had to do exactly as they were told. Otherwise, they would have lost their pre-selection. And that's unfortunate. But anyway, that's why people often say, why are you still a backbencher after all these years? I said, well, I was on the executive for 8 years. I was the chief. I'm here by choice. And it gives me time to do other things. I mean, I'm now on the executive of the Global Tuberculosis Caucus. So I travel around the world quite frequently, working with other parliaments and with the civil society and with the pharmaceuticals to develop a vaccine for tuberculosis. And so that's aside from my political, and it gives me a chance to do it. I could never do it if I was on the executive of government.
Yeah, it does give you a lot of opportunities to be on the backbench. So yeah, we'll get on now to our next question. Tobias.
Yeah, what made you run in the 1996 federal election for the Liberal Party?
Well, first of all, I went for the Liberal Party because they were the opposition. What really stirred me, I had cattle properties up in Cape York, and for my sins, I had been elected as the chairman of the Cape York Cattlemen's Association. And Paul Keating was introducing a thing called the Wick Native Title legislation. And it caused a whole lot of uncertainty, a lot of division within the community. And I had brokered a meeting in Cowan in Central Cape York with the then member, Peter Dodd, and his state counterpart, Steve Bretthauer. And I invited them to the meeting to try and explain to us what this legislation meant and what the impact would be. Anyway, they did come to the meeting, and there was probably about 80 or 100 graziers at the meeting. And I, as the chairman of the group, I expressed my concerns. And they were immediately ignored or just dismissed by the then member. And when I challenged him and said these are quite legitimate, climbed up on a stool and he challenged me to a month of his parliamentary salary against anything I wanted to offer, that the legislation would come down in, because he was a lawyer from Sydney, so he knew, would come down in favour of the graziers, the pastoralists, so we had nothing to worry about. And I went right off and I just said to him, you have no idea what you're talking about. Have a look around the room. This is not a black and white issue. There was probably, there would have been 20 or 30% of faces in that audience were black. And it was not whether or not, it actually had a very, very positive relationship up there, the Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. We work very well together and still do to a greater degree. And I said, so it's not a black and white issue. I said, the reality is it's a black on black issue. Because since there's been speculation about the native title rights in this area, there have been young anthropologists that have been turning up. And they have been sort of offering their service to one Indigenous family or another, and then making a case as to why they had a greater right to traditional land than their next door neighbours. And they were fighting each other. And, there's a couple of deaths up there. So I said, it's nothing to do. I said, how dare you offer, how dare you there offer to wager a month of your piddling salary against our future? And anyway, a whole lot of people just got right into him and they packed up and they left. And it was later that night I'd had a couple of beers and an old friend of mine, Billy Jackson from Wolverton Station, and I just said to him, mate, what are we got to do to make these buggers listen to us? And he sort of threw an arm around. He said, mate, if you want to change your attitude, you've got to change the government. And that's what got me thinking. That's when I seen an ad when I was taking a load of cattle down to the Maribosar yards in an old paper when I stopped at a roadhouse for coffee to make sure my cattle were on their feet still, because it was all dirt road. I made a phone call when I got to Mariba and I became the 7th candidate. I joined the party and applied for pre-selection as a candidate, and it was only about 3 or 4 weeks later, the pre-selection, and I won. Accidentally, but I won nevertheless. So that's how I got into it, because I just was very frustrated with what was happening. We actually wrote out, after they left, I wrote out a set of principles, myself and another couple of people, sat down and wrote out a set of principles that we thought could work. We passed those on to the Executive Cattlemen's Union. They actually become what they call the Cape York Heads of Agreement. So I was an author on that. And they won a reconciliation award back, I think, in 1997 or something like that, because of the process that we put forward. So yeah, that's how I got into it. Accident. When I first stood up,
accidental.
I didn't even know you got paid for the job. I didn't get paid for the Cattlemen's Union. I didn't get paid for the union rep. I didn't think you got paid. I had no idea.
Yeah, and I think also, just to touch on your point, I think a lot of politicians that we've talked to in previous interviews, I think Tobias and George can both agree with this. A lot of them have come through and run for politics because of a certain issue within their community. And I think that's the same with you, Warren, there with
Yeah,
the Labor government with what they were doing, especially with the grazers.
I miss the station. I mean, I don't so much miss the crocodile farm. I get too fat, too old to be jumping on crocodiles these days. But I do miss the stations. But, you know, that's a thing of the past now. I still got a whole heap of memories.
Yeah. We'll now move on to our final question for you, Warren. So I do realize you have some more important meetings to get to, so we'll quickly get through this one. So finally, what's one piece of advice you'd give to students in 2024, especially those who are starting university or high school?
I say this I often get asked to speak at, particularly in high schools, and I always remind people of my background. I never had the opportunity of going to, in fact, my son, my youngest son, Jake, who's 30 now, is the first one in my broader family that actually went to university. He's now got 3 degrees, psychology, MBA, and advanced IT. 30 years old, doing well. I always remind people of my own personal background as a 14-year-old. And I always say, don't be afraid. Just whatever it is, there's nothing that should be too low for you. Just do the best you possibly can. And the best will always be acknowledged and give you the opportunity for the next level. So you've got opportunities in schooling. Do the best you possibly can. You all can't be top grade A students. There's always in between, but there's always an acknowledgement and a reward for effort. And so, and focus on things that you enjoy, that you want to be part of, and don't realise that your first choice is not necessarily where you end up in life. Because again, a good example of that. And there are so many opportunities out there. You grab them when you can, but just doesn't matter what it is. You just do the best you possibly can do, and that effort will be rewarded by another opportunity that presents itself. And just focus. The other thing that I always say to people that are going into uni or looking at going into uni, save a gap year for later on. Keep the momentum going. A lot of people, no, we'll take a gap year, and then it'll take 2 years, take 3. And then later in life, they regret the opportunity that they could have had. But they chose not to because they wanted to take gap years. It's a very competitive world out there, so get the best you can. You don't necessarily have to be a university trained. Some of our most chronic shortages at the moment are in blue collar. I was a maintenance fitter welder. I was aircraft engineers. They're chronic shortages. And, I can tell you now, a plumber or an electrician will earn a hell of a lot more money a lot sooner than a lot of university graduates. In my staff here, I have a geologist here, a qualified geologist who's working in my electorate office. Great, she's got the qualifications, she's got the skill set from, going through the uni. And it's great that we get university people trained, but it's not the be all and end all to be able to make a really good positive contribution to life and get a really good, good job, good high paying job and build a career. So it's not the be all and end all. So there you go. There's a bit of advice.
That's some very, very good advice there.
14-year-old toilet cleaner from a railway station, mate. And here I am.
14-year-old toilet cleaner with some great advice there, Warren. I hope our viewers take
working.
Yeah, I hope our viewers there take a lot of that advice down because it is really, really important. Especially as you said, not everyone can be an A grade student. That's why there's A, B, C, D, all the way to F grades. Not everyone can fit in that one whole category. So, and that doesn't necessarily mean you aren't an important person or you're useless in a sense. Literally everyone in society is important in their own ways, and everyone has the same amount of value. But we have different skills and different things that we're good at.
And like you said, not every, but you still have opportunity. I mean, and the people you meet. I mean, I know Bill Gates reasonably well. He supports Israel, and I met him, and I know him because of the work I do at TP. I was for a long time the co-chair of the Parliamentary Friendship Group for Tibet. I have a personal friendship with His Holiness, the Dalai Lama.
Wow.
You know, I mean, this is true. I mean, I'm just trying to show here. You know who that is?
Oh, do you know who that is,
Sure.
George or Tobias?
Sure. That's sure.
Oh, sure. Ah,
Yeah, sure. You can see it there. Hey. See it?
oh, oh, yeah. I think, yeah. Do you guys see it or?
Do you see that? Yeah. How's that?
Yeah, we see it now. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So there's lots of things, you know, you have the opportunity of meeting a lot of people, and you know, and I'm not afraid to tell them my background. Most of them are quite impressed. Be proud of who you are. Just do the best you possibly can, whatever it might be, and people acknowledge that.
Exactly. Yeah. So those are all our questions there for you, Warren. I'd like to
Well,
thank you again for joining us. It's been almost an hour and 30 minutes that we've been on call, so it's been a pretty long interview, but your answers have been brilliant, and I think it's going to be really good for our viewers to hear your stories, especially, you've got such a diverse, you had such a diverse line of work before entering Parliament. So I'd like to thank you again for joining us for these last hour and 20 minutes.
Well, I hope you got something out of it, eh?